The old house stood silent, dark, empty, or so it seemed. Sarah stepped inside. Dust swirled in the faint moonlight. She shivered. The air felt heavy, cold. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Sarah froze. Her heart pounded in her chest. She listened. Silence. Just the house settling, she whispered, trying to convince herself. She took a deep breath and moved forward. Each step echoed in the stillness. The air grew colder as Sarah climbed the stairs. The banister felt like ice beneath her hand. She reached the top. A long, dark hallway stretched before her. A soft knock echoed from the end of the hall. Sarah jumped. Her eyes darted to the sound. The door at the end of the hall stood slightly ajar. Another knock, slow, deliberate. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She crept closer, each step filled with dread. Coming from behind the door, Sarah's blood ran cold. She had to see what was there. Sarah pushed the door open. The room was dark, except for a sliver of moonlight coming through a boarded-up window. Dust motes danced in the pale light. Then, music, a waltz, slow, mournful, beautiful. It seemed to come from thin air. Sarah's skin prickled with goosebumps. A cold wind swept through the room, swirling the dust into a frenzy. Sarah coughed, waving her hand in front of her face. She could have sworn she saw two figures dancing in the shadows. The music swelled. The laughter, cold and hollow, sent shivers down Sarah's spine. She wanted to run, but something held her there. Something in the music, in the laughter, drew her in. The moonlight shifted, revealing the room in its entirety. The once grand ballroom now lay in ruins, a shadow of its former glory. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was almost deafening. It was as if time had stopped in this haunted place, preserving the echoes of a bygone era. It was a ballroom, grand and decaying. The walls, once vibrant with color, were now faded and peeling. The floor, which had seen countless elegant dances, was now covered in dust and debris. Cobwebs hung from the once magnificent chandelier. The crystals, now dulled by time, barely caught the light. It was a haunting reminder of the splendor that once was. The walls were adorned with faded murals of dancing couples. Their faces, though blurred by time, still held a trace of joy and elegance. It was as if they were trapped in an eternal dance, forever bound to this decaying room.
And in the center of the room, the dancers. They moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, their forms shimmering in the moonlight.
A bride and groom, their forms shimmering, translucent. They seemed to float above the ground, their movements synchronized and fluid. The bride wore a tattered white gown that flowed around her like mist. Her eyes, though hollow, held a deep sadness. The groom, a handsome figure in a threadbare suit, held her close. His expression was one of longing and sorrow. They waltzed gracefully, their feet never touching the ground. It was a dance of love and loss, a hauntingly beautiful display. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow sockets. Yet there was a strange beauty in their ethereal forms. Yet they moved with a strange, heartbreaking beauty. Each step, each turn was filled with a sorrowful grace. Sarah watched, mesmerized and terrified. She felt a chill run down her spine as she took in the ghostly scene before her. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the spectral couple. Their dance was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a tragic display of love lost to time. Their dance was both mesmerizing and horrifying. It was a haunting reminder of the past, a ghostly echo of a time long gone. The music stopped abruptly. The dancers turned toward Sarah. Their hollow eyes seemed to pierce her soul. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. She wanted to scream, but no sound came out.
The bride glided towards Sarah, her white dress trailing behind her. Her cold, bony fingers reached out, beckoning. Sarah felt a chill grip her heart. Join us. Join our eternal dance.
Sarah wanted to refuse, to run, but the bride's eyes held her captive. She felt herself being pulled forward, drawn into the ghostly couple's embrace.
Forever.
Sarah felt a cold hand close around hers. It was like ice. The room began to spin. Shadows danced on the walls, creating an unsettling atmosphere that made Sarah's heart race. She could feel the air grow colder, as if the room itself was alive and watching her every move. The music started again, faster this time, more urgent. It was as if the gramophone had a mind of its own, dictating the tempo of the night. The melody was haunting, a mix of sorrow and madness that seemed to seep into her very soul. Sarah felt herself swept into the dance, her feet moving without her consent. She tried to resist, but it was futile. The music had taken control, and her body was no longer her own. Each step she took echoed in the room, a prisoner to the spectral rhythm. The ghostly guests swirled around her, their faces a blur of pale skin and hollow eyes. They moved with an eerie grace, their presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. Sarah could feel their cold breath on her skin. The bride and groom chanted words Sarah couldn't understand, their voices a haunting chorus. Their eyes were empty, yet they seemed to see right through her. The words they spoke were ancient, filled with a power that made her feel small and insignificant. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was wrong. This was madness. Every instinct told her to run, but her legs wouldn't obey. She was trapped in this nightmare, a puppet to the spectral forces around her. Sarah felt herself fading, her senses overwhelmed. Was this the end? Her vision blurred, and the world around her began to dissolve into darkness. She could feel herself slipping away, consumed by the spectral forces that had claimed her. Then, silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on everything around it. Sarah lay on the cold ballroom floor, gasping for breath. The room was empty, the music was gone, the echoes of laughter and the whispers of the past had all but faded into the void. The ghostly dancers had vanished. Their spectral forms, once so vivid, now seemed like distant memories, almost as if they had never been there at all. Sunlight streamed through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. The light, though weak, brought a semblance of warmth to the otherwise cold and desolate room. Dust motes danced in the golden light. They floated lazily, undisturbed by the turmoil that had just unfolded. Had it all been a dream? The vividness of the experience made her question reality. She wondered if her mind had played tricks on her. Sarah slowly got to her feet, her head pounded, her body ached. Every movement was a struggle, as if the weight of the night bore down on her. She stumbled towards the door, desperate to escape the haunted ballroom. Each step felt like an eternity, her legs heavy with fear and exhaustion. As she reached the doorway, she glanced back. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching. Lying on the floor, she saw a single white rose. Its presence was both beautiful and haunting, a stark contrast to the gloom around it. Its petals were as cold as ice. The chill seemed to seep into her bones, a reminder of the night's eerie events. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. The sensation was almost electric, making her shiver uncontrollably. She would never forget this night. The memories were etched into her mind, a permanent scar. The ghost wedding would forever haunt her dreams. Every time she closed her eyes, she would see the spectral figures, hear the phantom music, and feel the cold touch of the white rose.